Alright, it says to solve the equation x squared is equal to negative 18 minus 9x. Now we notice that there's an x squared here, and that tells us that we have what's called a quadratic equation. And a quadratic equation is any equation that can be written in this form here, where you have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. You have all the variables and the constant term on the left and 0 on the right. And of course you have the variable squared. That's the key feature of a quadratic equation. It's also important to remember that it must be set equal to 0. And the reason that that's important is that we also will take advantage of this thing called the zero factor property. And all that says is that if you multiply two things together and get 0, so if you multiply a times b and you get 0, then you know for sure that either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0 or both. The only way two things can multiply together to be 0 is if one or both of those factors is equal to 0. And so we'll see where that comes into play as we solve this one. Alright, so we want to first put the equation that we're given into this form here, which means move everything to the left and have 0 on the right. Now what we want to do is add 9x to both sides and add 18 to both sides. And when we do that, we get x squared plus 9x plus 18 is equal to 0. And it's important that we write it in the order, in descending order. So the x squared first, and then the x term, and then the constant, just like it shows here. And the next step is to then factor this polynomial. It's a trinomial, so we can factor it just using trial and error. Remember how we do factoring. We put x and x here because we know that x times x is going to give us x squared. And we need to multiply two things together to give us 18, and those two things have to add together to give us 9. So we can use x plus 6 and x plus 3. So the polynomial factors then, as we see here. Now we take advantage of the zero factor property, because what we have is the product of two things equaling 0. I've got that thing is times this thing equaling 0. Well, the only way that could be true is if this one, x plus 6, is equal to 0, or the other one, x plus 3, is equal to 0. Well, x plus 6 is equal to 0. That's a small little equation. We can solve that. We subtract 6 from both sides, and we get x is equal to negative 6. Here we subtract 3 from both sides, so we get x is equal to a negative 3. So we have two solutions. Quadratic equations usually, not always, but usually have two solutions. Let me just summarize then what we did to solve this equation. To solve a quadratic equation by factoring, now we'll see other methods, but to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, if it's not already factored. Now sometimes they'll throw one at you that's already factored. So if we had been given this equation in this form here, well, the factoring would have been done for us. But if it hasn't been done for us, what we do is we first put the equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Put everything on one side and 0 on the other. Factor the left side. Set each factor equal to 0. And then solve each of those, well, I call it baby equations. Solve each of these equations that you get when you set each factor equal to 0.